We call this work session to order. It's Tuesday, August the 27th, 2024. It's 2:30 p.m. We're in the Board of Supervisors hearing room, Melody Lane, Bisbee. Pursuant to ARS 38-431.02H, the public will have physical access to the meeting place 15 minutes prior to the start of the meeting. Any item on this agenda is open for discussion, and we begin with the roll call. District 1.
Crosby is here.
District 2, Supervisor English is present. District 3.
Supervisor Judd is here.
We have a complete board. Members of the public may also attend this meeting by Microsoft Teams computer or mobile app, or by phone by calling 602-609-7513 or 888-680-6714. Conference ID 929-645-960#. If you have trouble accessing this meeting remotely, call 520-432-9200 for direction. Work sessions are a time for county staff to inform and discuss agenda items with the Board of Supervisors, and public comments will not be taken. Introductions at work sessions are primarily for the record, and we want to make sure that before you speak, give us your name and your title so that it's part of the permanent record. Today our discussion is going to be on the report that we got from Maddie's Millions Pet Challenge, the feasibility study for animal control and sheltering services in Cochise County. So, Ms. Gilman, are you going to be leading the charge today?
Yes, Chairman English, Supervisor Crosby, Supervisor Judd. So I've asked Dr. Sarah Pisano to present to the Board of Supervisors today about her report regarding animal shelter and animal welfare practices in Cochise County. You may recall at a previous work session, I mentioned that we had received this free consultation from Maddie's Millions through a grant. And this is the result of that work. She came out for 2 days in June and visited with various stakeholders, including ACOs from the Sheriff's Office. We had a fantastic discussion regarding their challenges in the field, and that's included in her report. So I'm going to just turn it over to Dr. Sarah for now, and then we can discuss her findings and her recommendations, and I'll provide additional information after that.
Okay, Dr. Pisano, are you on the line?
Yes, can you all hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time. And Sharon or Lara, where am I advancing? Is it, am I sliding? How am I getting to the next slide?
Are you clicking?
Nope. It looks like I'm going to ask Laura to answer your question up there.
Okay, because I need to, yeah, let me see if mine is working. I need to have control over the slides.
Can she have control? I've given her control. She should. Dr. Sarah, you should have control.
Okay. Let's see. It's not working on my end. So,
Can't you just pick it up and click it for her?
I can try.
it's, yeah, I need to have control. I don't see any.
So, Laura, it looks like what's being projected is still the slides that I can control. Can you change the screen for her?
Share screen.
Yeah.
She did the sharing screen for
So, Dr. Sarah, you can either share your screen or I can advance the slides for you.
I need to share the screen. It's just easier. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Less distracting. So I'm not usually on Teams. I'm on Zoom. So if I just hit share, that what I need to do?
Yeah. Can you guys stop sharing? Laura?
Choose what you want to share. It's now this is asking me on my computer.
Mm-hmm. So you should be able to pick your slide.
Sorry, I apologize. In the interest of time, I'll just have you
Okay.
advance. So if we could just start at the beginning.
Sure.
So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time. I plan on taking maybe about 30 minutes with these high-level slides that summarize the feasibility study and then give you plenty of time for questions. But this is a program with Maddie's Fund, which is one of the largest animal welfare organizations in the country. And Maddie's Million Pet Challenge is our program that is a collaboration between my consulting company, which is Team Shelter USA, the University of California, the University of Florida, and Open Door Veterinary Collective. I'm also on the PetSmart Charities teams, and they had helped with some transfers while we were in town. So I just wanted to explain all the players because I know we're a confusing bunch and highly collaborative. I myself have been in animal welfare for more than 30 years. I've been a veterinarian for 30 plus of those years, and I was also a public shelter director. So I very much understand the challenges in your community, and that's what we're going to talk about, is not just the challenges, but the solutions. And so when we say best practices, everybody can't have, for example, a Mayo Clinic or, the fanciest building. That's not what this is about. This is about getting to a goal and providing the best services, public and animal safety for your constituents. The next slide. And so as Sharon said, we award pro bono consults all over the country. We've been in Arizona before as well. And we were actually referred by PetSmart Charities and the interim director at the Humane Society of Southern Arizona, who really wanted us to come in and see how we could help. And so the city of Douglas also received a pro bono consult, and we did both. We do a lot of research prior to coming to your community, and we can help for the next year. Everything we do is pro bono, and we network, and when there's challenges, we just try to help you overcome those challenges. Next slide. And we often get asked, well, what are you looking at when you do these consults or feasibility studies? And the answer is everything. We start with your state statute because, of course, your local ordinances can be more strict but not more lax than your state statute. And we always find opportunities to revise local ordinances to help your county work in a more efficient and productive way. We come across some very outdated ordinances, so always look at those when we're trying to help a community improve their services. Area animal welfare organizations, we talk to a variety of organizations, again, before, during, and after. We visited with some as well, toured other places. You have very passionate, caring, dedicated animal welfare organizations. And so we were really happy to see how many people are invested in what happens with animals and people in need. The pet resource part I'm going to touch on, and all these different areas. If you already read the report, you saw one of the major things we're recommending is shelter software that covers field services so that you can have appropriate data and be able to analyze trends easily, retrieve data and compare whatever you need to compare. Maybe it's month over month or year over year. And then you might be wondering why I'm talking about housing and adoptions and those types of things, because your county right now exclusively does field services. These are all very crucial, and that is because you have contracts with other shelters. And so part of your program must be funding appropriately and making sure that your contract shelters are operating to the best of their abilities. And again, we're meeting, I have an update slide coming up about Douglas, but we absolutely appreciate the great expanse of your county and the distance between your towns, and that's part of what we're looking at to help you form the best plan to move forward. Next slide, please. So none of these recommendations are things that we made up. These are industry standards, and we have done many consults all over the country and found that these recommendations actually are universal. We have industry standards with the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, and as we've been doing these consults, hundreds of consults around the country, what we found was the solutions are universal, and we were writing the same reports. And so I published the best practice playbook for animal shelters. Sharon and your team has several copies. We provide those playbooks whenever we do consults, but it's the spoiler alert, as I call it. And when you do have the report, that's specific and really explains how these core recommendations relate to your community. Next slide, please. So again, you are part of the public and animal safety, especially with your field services teams, and that's what you're quote unquote responsible for. But the way your MOUs and contracts and funding is set up with your contract shelters matters, because if those shelters are not operating efficiently in a life-saving way, that's a reflection on you as well. And so we are so excited that the City of Douglas, next slide please, has decided to also have the pro bono consults, and we are very encouraged with the progress that's already made. Sharon can share the link. If Anna didn't share that with you, I will share that with you after the meeting. But the City of Douglas on their website has an animal shelter page now, so that the community can see what progress has been made since our report, and then moving forward, keep up with what's happening. The reason I'm going to stay on this slide for a second is that you're responsible for about half the intake. So they're taking in about 1,100 animals a year, and half of those are from the Cochise field team, county field team. So this is really important because you obviously know there are a lot of complaints about this shelter. In 2023, half of the dogs, the canines that came in, and 86% of the cats that came in, felines that came in, were euthanized. So we know that there is a better way to set up this system that we call animal sheltering and field services. And so a couple of things that have already happened that we are so encouraged about is a contract that's about to be signed with a veterinarian on record. And that is a person who helps with training, with setting up medical protocols, so that when animals come in and they need basic care, vaccinations on intake, all of those things will be provided for animals that enter the shelter. Right now at that shelter, there are 3 animal control officers, and then you have your group of animal control officers bringing animals to the shelter, but there's no other staff. So right now, and on September 11th, second reading, we're hoping that a shelter coordinator position will be approved. Another very important turning point is a national organization, Best Friends. This is a $750 million national organization, has recognized that the city of Douglas needs help, and they are voting, the city of Douglas is voting on an embed program. And that means Best Friends would send a staff person to the shelter for 6 months to work full-time, train the staff, and make sure all these different programs are implemented. Kennel positions are incredibly important to care and feed appropriately for the animals. The ACOs can't do everything, and so those kennel positions are in the works as well. Once those things are in place, then you can have volunteer inmate programs. You can have a regular volunteer program. You can have adoptions. And we know that there will be live outcome opportunities, adoptions. There's a desire for it. So I think there's people in your community understandably frustrated, thinking this is never going to change. And I totally appreciate that. But already we've seen progress. And so we're very hopeful that things will get better. And if we can go to the next slide. And this is, I wanted to talk about that first so that we could, so you'll understand why we're making the final recommendations that we'll talk about at the end. So again, with public policy, I've provided Sharon and the team with your ordinances in a Word document, and I added the red line revision recommendations in the playbook and in the report. I also included a chart that explains why certain things should and should not be included in an ordinance. And so moving forward, we are here to help through this process. I work with a lot of municipal attorneys and national attorneys, so very happy to help you with any questions and moving forward. And of course, we did the same thing for Douglas. So everything that we're talking to you about, we're talking to Douglas about. Next slide, please. So you saw in one of the title slides about pet resource services. So this means that as a municipality, as a nonprofit, we really need to be thinking about proactive programs, because those types of programs are always going to be the most fiscally responsible and cost effective. They can reduce enforcement complaints. They can absolutely, and I'm going to show you some great slides coming up about decreasing shelter intake and the need for shelter intake. You can improve your population immunity against infectious diseases like rabies and other diseases that animals can get and transfer between each other. This historic animal control system has always focused on separating animals and people, and now we've had a major renaissance, as started before COVID, but especially since COVID, with the main goal of keeping pets in their loving homes and looking at ways that we can help people instead of separating animals and triggering to that shelter intake. Next slide, please. Access to care, and this is basic veterinary care, is we're in crisis in our country. Not only do we have a very serious veterinary shortage that is projected to get worse, but we have the cost just to provide veterinary care that has risen to a higher degree than just the rate of inflation. Then you tack on looking at all of the pet owners in the United States, 187 million pets in the United States, thankfully less than 6 million going into shelters now, so we're doing better than ever. But just to give you an idea, it's not this major overpopulation crisis. It really is that we've never been helping people and pets in the right pathways, and that's the goal of this study and our help moving forward. but 29 million of those pet owners are on government assistance. And when we subsidize something like spay-neuter, we see all kinds of benefits that are, again, cost effective. Access to care is such a major issue that we really need to make sure that everything is targeted, meaning I'm making sure that if I am providing subsidized services, it is going to make the biggest impact because nobody has, next slide please, nobody has infinite resources. So targeted means I'm going to target populations that will make the greatest impact. And right now that's large breed dogs. They're at risk of going into shelters and they're at risk of spending the most time. And there's always these negative sequelae with respect to long lengths of stay. And then, of course, our socioeconomically challenged pet owners that want to spay neuter but can't afford it. And then cats with access to the outside have their own special section. Next slide, please. So here's two great examples, and I love these examples because these two communities did not communicate about this. But when you look at this, the line that's going up from left to right, and you look at the other two lines, it's a direct inverse correlation. So the line that's going up is targeted spay neuter, and the two lines with going down are intake, shelter intake, and euthanasia. So there's a direct inverse correlation. We also see this helping decrease enforcement complaints as well. So you might say, well, you know, we're a municipality. Why would we help subsidize spay neuter? People should be responsible for that. And that's true. And for the most part, people are. We are obsessed about spay neuter in our country. But research shows that most of the animals left in shelters or entering even as strays are from those lower socioeconomic demographics who, again, want to spay neuter but don't have access, and it will save you resources on the flip side. Next slide, please. So cats with outdoor access is a very, very important topic, and I'm going to sit here for a few minutes because this is usually also a hot topic. So we now know that about half of cat owners allow their cats indoor-outdoor access, and if you look at that pie chart from a recent study in 2022, the green and the blue is all the cats that are that have access to the outside, and that little sliver of yellow are the cats that are going into the shelter. And this has been a major transformation in our industry. For the most part, healthy outdoor cats, whether they're friendly or unsocialized, are no longer going into shelters. And that's because, again, nationally, and in your area, the return to owner RTO means return to owner is less than 2%. So congratulations to us for taking in these cats. We call them stray when they're not really lost. They're visually healthy, but 98% of the time, we're actually not achieving our goal of returning an owner, reuniting an owner. The idea is our resources are better spent and not wasted on taking cats, again, the yellow sliver. We can't get anywhere close, nor should we try to get all those cats through a shelter for there's no good reason. Historically, it was like, oh, we got to get them a good home, but we didn't have data that showed half of cat owners let their cats in and out and less than 2% are returned to their owner. So spay neuter is the answer. When they're spayed and neutered, we rabies vaccinate them. So now you're left with less cats, but a higher percentage that are vaccinated against rabies. Now kittens are, if we would like to get the kittens into an adoption track, but it depends on the state of your shelter whether or not they would enter a shelter. If you have a very fast adoption, short length of stay, they're in the shelter just a short period of time, then that's fine. But in a lot of places, that's not the case. But that's the ideal pathway. What we also find is communities, when we transition, and my teammate Cameron Moore, who is part of this consult, we've helped transition many hundreds of communities who were not doing this. They were taking the cats into the shelter and instead had them on a spay-neuter pathway. And guess what? It benefits, next slide please, everyone. There's less complaints, enforcement complaints, certainly because you've taken away those annoying mating behaviors. There's less enforcement calls. When you take in less animals into the shelter, your staff has more time to be proactive. Your field services has more time to be proactive. There's less of an impact on wildlife. We care about all species. We just want to make sure that we have everybody who's outside is spayed and neutered. TNR means trap, neuter, return, and SNR means spay, neuter, return, and that's to their original home location. And I thought this program was insane when I was a public shelter director. And look at me now, I'm the preacher, because everywhere people don't complain anymore because we've taken away those mating behaviors, and we've helped people solve their problems if they had problems in their neighborhood. Now, when you don't have this program and you don't have access to care, this is when everybody gets in trouble because you have way too many cats, colonies form and such. This is about colony prevention. So works everywhere like a charm. And there's a lot of great groups in your area already doing a significant amount of TNR, but this is another area where we're asking all the municipalities to subsidize as part of the targeted spay-neuter program. Next slide, please. So community-minded field services, it means that we are not going to focus just on trying to cite people, but we're reserving punitive measures for those true perpetrators of cruelty and malicious neglect. And I say that because we have had this enforcement-minded approach for so long, but this is a dramatic change in our industry. The other thing that we know is that, again, 187 million pets in the United States. There's dogs walking around all over the place, but they're not causing problems. They're right near their homes. They're going home. And so the idea is helping, and neighbors for sure are helping dogs get home every single day. So when there's an opportunity, and I know you do have large expanses in rural areas where this is not the case, but when you're in a neighborhood where there's plenty of homes and likely the dog is still in their neighborhood, talking to neighbors, seeing if anybody can foster to keep that dog in the neighborhood, because that's how we're going to get them home. When they enter a shelter, there's less than a 20% chance. And obviously this doesn't go for your aggressive animals, your injured, anybody causing some other kind of enforcement problem. Next slide, please. And I want to make sure I acknowledge your field team, which we found very impressive. Excellent team. Your team is really embracing a community-minded approach. I think the biggest challenge for them is they need more resource pathways. That's one of the major challenges. And then, of course, the amount of time between your towns and cities, and so that's going to be tied in, next slide please, to the recommendations. We want to make sure that if an animal is taken to a shelter, that it's done once all those other options are exhausted. And when we work directly with sheltering organizations, that looks like owner surrenders would first need to look for a home for their pet themselves. And there's lots of great new online platforms. The City of Douglas is in the process of doing one of them that you'll be hearing about. It's called Home to Home, and it's integrated into their Facebook and website. But this means that because historically we have just taken animals in with no question, now we're saying, wait a minute, like you didn't even try to find a home for your pet, or maybe you did and you couldn't find a home for your pet. So I'm going to put you on a waiting list that might be 3 or 4 weeks long, so you hold on to your pet. Well, right there, that tells me that it's not. Okay, so the reason it is so crucial that we exhaust all options before animals enter shelters is because it is incredibly stressful for the animals. And if it's stressful for the animals, it's stressful for people. And that means staff, volunteers, the public, visitors. You're at risk of exceeding capacity for care and having infectious disease outbreaks. And it really is a waste of resources because you put yourself in a situation where you can't provide basic care. And so it's very important that shelters make sure that they've exhausted all options. And one of the great new tools that's out, and I think you didn't hear me talk about, I just kept talking. I probably talked for 5 minutes before I knew we were disconnected. But what we know is, as municipal shelters and private shelters, we've just blindly accepted animals into the shelter, no question. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. And we see shelters in your area too. Oh, well, we have a waiting list for owner surrenders. Well, that tells me it's not an emergency. And so what can we cleaning appropriately? Oops, hold on, I'm hearing. I think I got you back on the.
No, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I want to just mute. Oh, no. I can hear like myself speaking twice. You can only hear me once?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So appropriate housing, and again, this matters to all your contracted shelters. And there's definitely improvement that's needed that we talked about in both reports. The next slide is about medical care and disease surveillance. Again, we're very excited about the Douglas Vet on Record, but you have
shelters in your area that are really struggling with veterinary care and having to pay full price for just basic spays and neuters, for example, and they're nonprofit. So there's ways that you can all work together. One of the things that we are so encouraged about too is that the city of Douglas did purchase the adjoining building, and that includes a spay-neuter clinic that already has anesthesia machines, already has an autoclave, and we feel like we can get funding for surgery packs. And so it is very important that that space is used for subsidized spay-neuter. But remember what I told you about the veterinary shortage. For every veterinarian who's looking for a position, there's 18 positions open. So what that will look like is a puzzle. It'll be per diem surgeons. It'll be visiting surgeons. But we need to help you increase capacity in your community. The next slide is placement. So all the different ways that we can get and need to get animals out of the shelter quickly. Unfortunately, and I'm using Douglas as an example a lot because they did the consult as well with us, but we did visit a number of other shelters, is that because of the complaints with Douglas and the euthanasia rate, your field services team stopped posting animals who might be available for adoption or who were picked up as stray because they were getting complaints. So as you know, as the Douglas shelter and all other shelters improve, everybody does better. The next slide is partnerships and collaboration, that I cannot stress enough that no stone should be left unturned. All nonprofits and municipalities should be working together, and every other business. In every business in your community, there are animal lovers, whether it's a car dealership or Starbucks or whatever. So partnerships and collaboration between municipalities and nonprofits is how we communities become the most successful, and it just doesn't happen without those partnerships and collaboration. So I'm getting towards the end, and I'm going to talk about specific recommendations for you all. These were all, the chart is in the report, but I pulled out the high-level idea. So we should be on the retrofit Toverall Road slide. And certainly the pros with that are an approved USDA grant and then the county funding that you put aside for the retrofit, and that you already own that building. It is also an opportunity to set up a shelter with all the right programs in place. So everything that I just talked about, from safety net and pet resource services and exhausting options and quick lengths of stay, all of those things can happen. But on the flip side, you have an expansive county. You have no one perfect location that can service everyone in your county. And then the biggest piece, in my opinion, is that the Humane Society of Southern Arizona had agreed at the writing of the USDA grant to operate the shelter, but then since then has had changes and are no longer going to do that. And so that means the county would have to run and operate. And so you're talking about staffing, creating staffing in an ongoing budget that is a lot more expensive endeavor than operating with multiple MOUs like you're already doing. So let's go next to purchase and utilize Tailtopia. So again, pros are, it's move-in ready for dogs. There's double compartment housing. There's ample play yards. It's in a populated place in your county in Sierra Vista. There's potential to retrofit spaces for not only cats, but for a spay-neuter clinic. And then when we look at the cons list, you would have to purchase that. You don't know if the USDA would approve using that money to purchase Tailtopia. It's in very close proximation to the Sierra Vista shelter, so you have a duplication of services, and you have, quite frankly, competition for volunteers and fosters and adopters and all of those things. And when, again, I keep going back to the multiple locations because of the expansiveness of your county, is a better option for you. In addition to the purchase price of Tailtopia, then you would again be a county operated facility and need to have an operational budget every year, create all the staffing, and then you have an access road that does need to be paved, which would be a significant dollar amount as well. So what we do recommend, and we should be sharing on the slide, that says improve current shelters and increase funding, which is recommended. So again, for several reasons, the expansiveness of your county, having multiple locations is preferable. Your ACOs, your field teams, everybody has to drive anyway, so this gives them multiple options. And then we already did have a meeting with the USDA and asked if this would be an option to help your current MOU shelters, your current contract shelters, help them retrofit and get to baseline with humane housing. So that remains to be seen. But we do feel that, again, partnerships with not just those contract shelters, but one question that came up last night in the community presentation is, what about other shelters? And I was talking to Tombstone. I've talked to Patty a couple weeks ago, and just something like a subsidized spay-neuter program could absolutely help that shelter in big ways, and access to care and things like that. So there are opportunities, great opportunities, to help, not just with funding that would be less, yes, increased funding, because we don't think you're at baseline for your contract shelters, but that dollar amount is a lot less than purchasing a building and operating your own shelter from soup to nuts. We know that there's opinions in the community that included, we can't talk about Douglas because of the high euthanasia rate, but again, and I appreciate the frustration from people in the community, but from what we see since we've been involved is forward progress. And we do think, and especially if Best Friends can come in and that contract is going to be voted on at the September 11th meeting coming up with the City of Douglas Council, we're going to see, it's just going to be unrecognizable. And so that, again, is just one of the contract shelters that you're already using. And the last slide is just references and resources. So if you do, and these are all, again, in the report, if you wanted to do any further reading, you could go down rabbit holes forever. So I'm glad that you could hear the presentation, and I'm happy to answer or discuss anything that I've talked about.
Good, Tom.
Dr. Pisano, thank you very much for your presentation today. I wonder, how did you come to study Cochise County to begin with?
That's a great question. So I'm on the PetSmart Charities team, and they're based in Phoenix. And we have a lot of colleagues around the country, and Jose Ocaña was asked to be the interim director at the Humane Society of Southern Arizona after there were all those issues. And so Jose and Heidi Marston, who's from PetSmart Charities, asked us to look at Cochise County and the city of Douglas to see how we could help. Remember what I said about if Douglas and your other shelters do better, everybody does better. So what was happening is the Humane Society of Southern Arizona was asked to take all these animals, and they're like, wait a minute, there's a better way. So if the shelters improve in Cochise County, then there's less of an emergency and a burden on them. So Heidi and Jose asked us, and we reached out to Sharon, and we spoke to the city of Douglas. There's an application process, and so each did the application, and they were approved.
Okay, anybody else? I have a few notes here. I agree that pets are very important, and I like your comments that everybody does better. So as have been a proponent of Tailtopia, and I believe that that it is better to have a virtually turnkey facility here than to build a new one. But I also want to keep working to do the partnerships that we have, including Douglas, if they get squared away. Do you have any comments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, was that directed towards me? I can't.
Well,
see
you know,
well.
you can talk about it if you want, or somebody else can talk.
Sure. I mean, and that's what I laid out in the slides. We are proponents because of the expansiveness and distance between cities in your county, that it is the best idea to have a multiple locations, because already your ACOs are driving many, many miles per day. And so the multiple locations, we think, is the most efficient and effective way for you to provide for not just field services, but sheltering services.
Okay. I appreciate that also. And I also want to recognize Chief Wyatt Berry from Huachuca City is with us today. And I wonder, you don't have to address this today, but is there a possibility that Huachuca City would want to operate Tailtopia at some point in time?
Tom, I don't think we want to open it up to the public because that's our,
Okay, that's fine.
it's a work session, and if we
Then
open it
then I
up to
just
one,
want
we'd
to
have
put
to
that
open it
out
up
there
to
to
all.
my colleagues then, that the possibility of Huachuca City wanting to operate, just an option, looking at options. We would want to operate Tailtopia with IGA, and Mr. Berry caught my attention because he was my son's Sheriff Explorer leader, and I was trying to think of how long ago that was. That was 16 years ago or something like that. Real. Okay, time
Peggy,
flies.
just
I have a
comment.
comment. One of the reasons that we are needing to feel as, maybe Teltopia is the right place, but Huachuca City had a very successful shelter. And because of a fire in the kitchen, it closed
Right.
down. And so there was a void. And you probably heard about that in your with us. And I don't know if, we don't know that Huachuca City would be perfect to run Teltopia with a agreement to run that for us, but that is an option, and I believe that's an option as well. But there's a void there. Huachuca City feels a void, and Teltopia is 10 minutes away. Is that correct? Anybody who knows?
From Huachuca
From
City.
Huachuca City.
It's closer
maybe
than Douglas.
15. Well, and closer than Benson. Benson's about 25 minutes away from Huachuca City. So we're working with Benson, and that's a great relief valve. I'm happy about it. But I think that's the reason why Teltopia was of interest, because of the turnkey.
Yeah.
Okay,
So if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in here. This is Sharon. So I understand we've had that, or we've received some emails regarding Huachuca City being interested in running the shelter. And so I reached out to the city manager, Suzanne Harvey, to ask her if that was something that we needed to explore further. She told me at the time that she's speaking as the city town manager, and they have not spoken with council about that. She says that she does not have an appetite for running any shelter at this time. And that especially if Tailtopia because it's not within the limits of Huachuca City. So she said I could share that with you. So I am. And certainly if there's other conversations happening, I'm open to continuing that conversation with her. She's, you know, if we want to explore that, but that's where she's at as of this morning.
Thank you, Sharon. I just wanted to talk about options.
Sure. And I wanted to give that information to you so that you had that feedback.
Well, in my opinion, we allocated some county dollars to this process. And whether or not the USDA grant can be manipulated and at this point or rewritten, which would take years, I think that we see progress when Benson now has stepped up and said, okay, if you do something with us, if you help us out, you know, then we'll all benefit. And we did that. Why could we not look at, I mean, Wilcox has done the same thing. You know, Wilcox, we own the building. You know, they operate it. So we have a way to work with them. Why can we not look at taking what we already have in place at these numerous places and helping them to have a better program? And at the top of the list would be something that has been discussed and discussed and discussed is the spay and neuter. Now, if we can offer them money for if they need more space, but instead of space, what we're looking at is trying to eliminate the need for a lot of space. So if we can offer them, you know, services that we can buy and send to each one of them, I think we need to move forward with working the system and trying to do what we can, whether or not the USDA grant comes through. At the time, it seemed like the best idea. I don't have the appetite for it that I had 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But I think that we have made a commitment to the public to try to do a better job of looking at the animal control, animal welfare situation and seeing what we could do to make it better. So we do have, what, $1 million that we set aside to retrofit to do with this process. Is that still not available?
We do. We have 2 million set aside, and then the grant was 1.1 million.
Right. And I'm saying even with the grant, we still have money to move forward.
Without the grant, yes.
Without the grant. Now, in my opinion, the bad part about Tailtopia, whether it's a nice place. Granted, I've looked at the pictures and everybody's talked about how nice it is. Buying a building is only the beginning of that process, you know, and somebody has to run it and somebody has to take care of it. So when we own it, then we've got to take care of it all the time. We've got to keep it up. We've got to do all those things. We have organizations right now. If Huachuca City had wanted to be in the welfare business, they should have done something after the fire. And we would have worked with them, but they didn't. So we look at other resources. Who wants to work now with animal welfare? Let's put out, what do you call it, a request for proposals as to how we could help them.
Are you referring to how we can help them request for proposals for running a shelter or
Yes,
request for
they're
proposals
running their own shelter better.
their own shelter?
See, we already have an agreement with each one of them.
Mhm.
So how can we enhance that so that they would do better and obviously, you know, the county ACOs would have a better feeling of working with it. Instead of starting with a whole new one, you know, and a whole new staff and et cetera, et cetera. Don't everybody talk at once.
Well, which facilities? We got Sierra Vista facility, and there is a Douglas facility.
Harris has never wanted to work with us.
Okay, they nonetheless have a facility.
Right,
Wilcox has a facility.
right,
Benson has a facility.
right.
Tombstone.
You already have MOUs with Benson, Wilcox, and Douglas. Those are your three right now.
Tombstone has always been a private nonprofit rather than Tombstone. You know, we call it Tombstone, but It isn't part of the city structure.
Bisbee has a shelter as well.
Tombstone is volunteer run. They have just a few kennels. It's a very small organization, nonprofit.
Bisbee? Yeah, but
Tombstone.
I know it's Bisbee. Do we have an agreement with them?
No, we don't have an agreement with Bisbee. Bisbee as well as a nonprofit, runs the
Right.
Bisbee Animal Shelter run, and very small kennel. They usually pull from Douglas as well.
And what you have to, again, the reasons I go over the best practices and the flow of animals, and that means in and out. So are we exhausting every opportunity, number one? But when they come in the shelter, is it a short length of stay? And when you have any size shelter, if you have long lengths of stay, then you will not have capacity to help many animals. And these shelters like Tombstone is 12 runs, and the length of stay is the key variable. And you need to understand that when you're looking at shelters and how they're operating.
I think a lot of flack was given to Douglas for many reasons, but one of them was the fact that they were going by the state law that allowed euthanasia after a period of time. And I think that's something that the county is going to have to deal with at some point in time, is the fact that are we going to go by the state law or are we going to keep them until they die on their own? And so that's going to make a big difference in where we put our dollars, because quickly you can spend the dollars on veterinarians and keeping them alive. And I think we'd be back at this same place, so I think we have to look at what's the healthiest way to go. How can we keep the animals alive without having to go by the state law? But you have to understand that from my perspective, I'm willing to take care of your grandmother, if you can't take care of her, but I'm not willing to take care of all the animals in Cochise County forever so that there would be no euthanasia.
Well, nor should you, nor can you. And so the one thing I'm sorry, I don't think I touched on specifically is euthanasia is appropriate for community unsafe large dogs. So aggressive dogs that you can't safely place in a home, and then medical that is too advanced, would require too many resources. Shelters are not for animals to go and live their lives, but when we take these steps, like I outlined in this presentation about helping people place their pets, and when they come in, advocate in the right way, it's a revolving door and a short length of stay. So I'm sorry I didn't mention the euthanasia thing, but there's absolutely appropriate euthanasia, and absolutely you can't keep animals. You can see how that would, inside a month, you would have no more space, right? If you were keeping animals that you couldn't have done.
The fact that more cost is less that we can do for our people unless we make some serious adjustments with taxes or whatever you want to do. And nobody wants to hear that evil word, but there's a thought behind that. So if we do go to Taltopia, probably what commitment do we have with existing staff on there too, that we don't lose them? Because every year I fight right to keep my employees. I know my other colleagues feel the same way. And your department directors feel that way too in the boards. So I just think it's important to understand that. I mean, we go pay more money for Douglas to get better. That's just less money we have to take care of our current talent, our ACOs, our deputies. What I'm saying is we're not getting rich in this job as a county employee. None of us are. And people think that, or obviously they don't know county government, but I'd hate to see us, and I'm all about animal welfare. I'll be the strongest one. that voice there with them. But whatever you do, I just gotta make sure we do it with efficiency in mind, that we do it, that takes us forward, that we maintain what we have to. I don't want to come next year and say, yeah, we bought Teletopia, we bought in, I think about $700,000 to run it. And then I said this meeting next year doing a budget proposal, and I get told, you have no money, Sheriff. There's no money for your people. That's not good.
That's what I'm saying is you take on the building, okay, that's gone. But every year you've got to pony up another $700,000 to run that facility. Is there not a better way for the people that are out there that are operating facilities? And we've had trouble with Wilcox, but we worked through it, okay?
We did.
So what I'm saying is they may not be perfect now, but this organization that's offered us a year and training, et cetera, to help all the facilities to do a better job of not just sheltering. And in the past, that's all we've been doing is we take them in, we shelter them until we can push them out to some other organization, or maybe some of them get adopted. But it hasn't been, we haven't been working a whole program, is what I'm saying. We've only been bringing them in, putting them in the boxes or in the cages. You see what I'm saying? Is until something happened. You know, they either got shipped out or they got, but sheltering is what we were doing. That's not what Dr. Pisano is recommending for all of Cochise County, whether you're talking Teletopia or anything else. Not sheltering. Wants to get something done with the spay and neuter and teaching people who are working in shelters how to work with the animals better so that they'd be more adoptable or more useful in society.
Madam Chair, the best checks and balance you have for all of us sitting in this room is our animal control officers. You look at Chuka City, you look at Wilcox, you look at Douglas, all was brought forward by ACO to solve fractures in their processes and their programs, and that's how they got fixed, every one of them. And so that's the one, that's also besides what Dr. Sarah wants to do, you also have that. But I agree, our partnerships, we're doing well in Wilcox, we're doing well in Benson. Douglas, we'll see where that goes, and I hope it goes successful. But I think we got to fix what's broken first, and I guess where you're going too. Teletopia, I'm not against it. I just don't want to be sitting next year and find out we have no money.
Right.
And then I'm being telling my guys, you know, sorry, we got no money. I just think that prioritization of how we look at things is very important, and how you all look at it when it comes to taking care of a current existing town that has dedicated their lives and their families to this county and this county government. So.
There's also been talk around Teletopia that private individuals would organize and run it as a nonprofit. And I know I have a friend in Wilcox that has a nonprofit, and she runs her own shelter out of her home. And I know your ACOs know her well, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's good.
And it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. So is there a way that the county could promote or request for a proposal of a nonprofit to put forth within the next 80 days, 90 days, I think 80 is not a normal number, but 90 days, a request for proposal and set up an organization, at least possible organization to run it, that we would partner with, them, like a city.
Teletopia.
Yeah,
we work
like
for-
a Teletopia nonprofit. Could we ask for that? I mean, there's a lot of people that want to, that say that they're out there. They're giving names, they're naming names, giving me people to talk to, and just could we do that? Because it's harder to work with a nonprofit than a city. But I'm just wondering if that's even an option.
What RFPs were you talking about back a few minutes ago?
So.
Well, actually, it's about.
If I understand what Supervisor Judd is asking, is we have in the past, like when we had ran into issues with Wilcox, we did an RFP to a request for proposals for a nonprofit to run that shelter location because it was a county building and the city of Wilcox no longer wanted to run it. So there is a historical perspective there that we did put out for RFPs to run a county shelter, the county building of a shelter. We didn't get any successful proposals back and we ended up working through our issues with Wilcox. So if I understand Supervisor Judge, you're asking if we could pursue an RFP from a nonprofit to run Tailtopia, should we buy it? And I leave that to the board.
Well, I guess that's totally against the recommendation of the expert that has come to town. You know, they're saying that we should work with the ones that we have rather than taking on another building. So I guess that's what the board needs to look at right now is are you going to listen to the locals? You're going to listen to the experts? You're going to try and put a process together, or are you just going to buy a building?
I understood that one of her issues with that was that it was so close to Sierra Vista and you would be in competition for volunteers, for people getting adoptions done, for employees, that kind of thing. That was one of the bad things, is that she felt like it was in competition with Sierra Vista, and I don't think it is in competition with Sierra Vista. But would it cost us anything to explore that avenue? Or do we need to buy the building first? We don't have to buy the building first.
No, I don't think it doesn't really cost us anything to put out an RFP and get proposals and see what comes back.
And then if nothing happens, nothing happens. But at least they tried. We tried. We made an effort.
It's an option that you can certainly do. It's a little
It's iffy.
cart before the horse, just because we haven't purchased the building
Right,
yet.
right.
Like, you know, I'm not sure I would want to purchase a building and not have a plan in place for who to manage it. So I go back and forth in my mind between the 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Well, we
I'm
have
of the opinion if we have money that we should try and help out the ones that exist to do a better job, and us working with them rather than creating another empire. But eventually it'll come to the board, and so I guess right now Sharon is torn between, she's been working for, 3 years on the USDA grant?
Right. I mean, and that's just to update the board a little bit on that. So you recall we have an architect on contract to do the design of Toverville Road. I paused that because these discussions were still developing, and the architect understands that they're not doing any further work because of the change in direction that I was seeing from the board. And so we're not designing Toverville Road right now. We're waiting to see what you want to do with Tailtopia or with the other locations. And the USDA, I've reached out to them. They are pushing my request up to the national office for a reconsideration of how the grant money could be used. The rural shelters of Douglas, Wilcox, and Benson would qualify for grant money because of their population. But Sierra Vista is not considered a rural population because of its population size is over 20,000 people. So we could not use that. It's not an eligible use for those grant funds. Yeah, so if the county did purchase it, it would be out of the general fund.
if we were to come up with that extra million, how much was it? 1.3,
The Tailtopia was 1.1.
You had heard. USDA.
Oh,
If we were to come up with that, and maybe Suzanne would get, at Wichita City would get a better taste in her mouth for having a building in her community that they partnered with us.
For us to create a shelter in
Yeah.
Washington City itself.
We looked at that before.
We did. I don't know. I'd have to re-enter.
That
Yeah.
facility is still open, that facility we looked at, is still open.
Well, Wichita City didn't want to do it at that time, so, when we were looking.
Mhm.
But the one that we looked at, that was a clean slate building. Yeah. So, I believe that the USDA grant, if it could be spent not in Sierra Vista, but in Wichita City, we might be able to do that.
But none of the process with the USDA is going to be quick. We know that. So
Right.
I think if you are wanting to be responsive to what the public, to make a more impactful decision in a faster amount of time, it would be either
Do it to assist the people that already
already set, or if the board is interested in purchasing a building and having the sheriff's office run it and the increased costs associated with that.
They would have increased costs to run it, but
I'm
would
sorry.
you run it? Could you run it?
We could run it. I
One second.
working with our community volunteers and those, that's the option you have and but yeah, it's all like you guys tell me, well, do, but that's the end of the cost and then I gotta bring some extra budget to you every year and I don't want to be sitting in front of you on that. That's what I'm saying. There's gotta be some commitment there too. But again, Michelle, I'm not. But yeah, fine.
Apologize, Dr. Carey, you had something you wanted to say? You're echoing, but we're gonna keep it kind of trying to.
Oh, yeah, where to go. My question is the board considering buying Tailtopia and keeping the existing contracts with Benson, Wilcox, or Douglas? Or would it be the purchase of Tailtopia period and not have those contracts anymore?
That would be, we would like to add a shelter. We want to keep Douglas as far as it is possible and Wilcox and Benson in place. Because we are a large county. We need
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
void in Pachuca City.
Okay, I just wanted the clarification. I didn't know if it was either or.
No.
No, what's,
It was in addition to.
me, what is either gonna happen or not happen is Toveryville option. Do my colleagues concur? We're either gonna do Toveryville or we're not.
We have no one to run Toberville.
What say you, Madam Judge?
I agree. The volunteers and the people in Bisbee are very tied up with their own.
Okay, so we're Xing off Toveryville. Is that what I understand? Is that what you understand?
I don't think you can say we're Xing off Toberville. What we're saying right now is we don't have one to run Tailtopia. We don't have anyone to run Toberville. What we have is a recommendation that we look at the people who are already in the business and try to help them out, whether it's giving them one more employee or, or saying, do you need kennels? Do you need this? Do you need that? And putting them in a better position to be able to do what the suggestions were in this program. That we're not doing that program right now. We're sheltering. We're picking them up and we're sheltering. He was suggesting we do a different type of program, that we do more taking care of the animal, make sure they get their shots when they're brought in, that we do as much of the spay and neuter as possible. And so I don't know, I'm confused. I've never seen you two push for Tailtopia before, and all of a sudden today Tailtopia is the topic. And Tailtopia isn't the topic of what was recommended to us. So
You won't hear Madam Judge pushing for Tailtopia. The last thing she talked about was Wachuca City. Nonetheless, none of us three have talked about
Any of this.
deleting the other communities. None of us are talking about deleting any of the other communities.
what are you going to do for them?
Well, what are we doing for now? We have an affiliation with Douglas and Benson and Wilcox now.
Sure. So we have IGAs and we provide annual funding through those IGAs with each of those locations. One of the suggestions is that funding is not adequate for the amount of population that we bring to those shelters, and to support them more through more funding through their IGA.
Right.
Conversely, those IGAs should have more teeth in them so that we hold them accountable for their operations to a greater degree than we currently do. So that can be looked into. And then the spay and neuter, using funding to subsidize spay and neuter or help them set up spay and neuter mobile clinics, establish a clinic in Douglas, that kind of thing. So that's how that funding would alternatively be used.
And the funding would include staffing.
And staffing, yeah. So the additional funding through the IGAs would, for example, in Douglas, if they, one of the recommendations is for more kennel positions, we could, in our IGA say, I lost her. We could in our IGA say, this amount of funding is for these positions and ensure that they do staff appropriately. That we meet that baseline.
One of the suggestions by Dr. Pisano, and she's not there to say it, but I remember one of
I
the,
can hear,
Oh,
can
there
you
you
see
are.
me?
oh, she's on the real teams again.
Yes,
one-
it came back.
Good. One of the suggestions was that we leave local dogs that are in the neighborhood, and that we kind of have I guess it would be more education for the communities, but it also could acquire, or the ACOs could acquire a culture of helping, of kind of working with neighborhoods. And then the Facebook pages are wonderful for the lost and found pets. So, but that was one of the things that isn't going to cost us any money at all, is just that culture, creating that culture where we don't call the police department immediately when we find a
And that's
dog in our community.
something the ACOs talked about is
Yeah.
from the sheriff's office is how they could improve their outreach when they find animals and posting them on Facebook and creating their own page, perhaps through the sheriff's office for that. We've also talked about putting all the shelters on the same software system, because right now our stats are all over the place. It's hard to get accurate data as to what's happening in Douglas, Wilcox, or Benson, and compared to what the ACO's data is from their Stillman system. So there's a lot of incongruity there, a lot of garbage in the data.
Mhm.
So until we can really grasp that, it's hard to see the impact of our decision. But those are all measures we can take that are not hugely expensive.
And some people are able to foster for a minute, like Christine did. You fostered for a minute.
Yeah,
for a
couple hours.
Yeah, for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And some people didn't feel comfortable, like me, fostering for a little while. But if that is something that in communities we accept, as citizens, and maybe kind of get to know in the neighborhood, who maybe we could do signs that we put up on the fence that say, you can drop your dog off here for a few hours. I'd like a little foster symbol or something. So people are familiar with that, because most pet owners even have the food. And I read something in her presentation about supporting people who have those kind of needs. Like, maybe I don't have any dog food, but maybe they would bring me some, because I have a small dog now that I'm fostering for maybe overnight, maybe a couple days.
And
So,
ideally, the shelters might engage in those programs. as well.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Provide funding.
But they won't be able to do that if they don't have more staffing.
Correct.
And if they don't, I think they would have staffed more in the past if they felt like they had the money. And so if we're going to utilize the money that we have in the best way, I guess what I'm saying is, are we going to hire new people, or are we going to, the people that we have, give them more responsibility, pay them better, give them programming that they can utilize so that they can actually tell people about the successes of their job, et cetera. But again, if we haven't had a program that's working here, and I won't say that as having anything against the ACOs, but working in the sense of it's been sheltering and it's been moving animals. But according to the experts, that isn't a good model. So if you want to change the model, you're going to need more people on the ground to do that. And if you added a person to Benson and to Wilcox and to Douglas, and you put it in there, what do we expect from those places? Well, here are our expectations. This amount of money, and this is what you got to do. Who's going to be watching? Well, the ACOs are everywhere. And they know when people are dropping the ball. But you got to be able to do something. There got to have to be consequences. And we haven't had any consequences except bad reputations in the past. We haven't taken any money away from them. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think we need to look at what kind of policies do we need to develop so that we can have a healthy program. But as the sheriff said, we're always going to be competing for good employees. And I think that until we reach the stage where we can pay the employees that we have, not just adequately, but well, I'm just not in any department looking at wanting to hire more employees. I'm wanting to get people to a better place with the salaries that they have. Even if we're adding responsibility, people are usually willing to step up if they know they're going to get a salary increase and what it's for.
Do you mean you prefer no more county employees, or do you prefer no more employees subsidized in Douglas, no more?
I'm talking about county
Okay,
employees.
that's fine.
Right.
But so you're not against possible subsidy for Benson, Douglas, and Wilcox?
I'm for that because I don't think they can do more with their limited budgets also.
Okay, so I got more money for other communities written down, and Sharon, you talked about tightening up IGAs for funding. And so did you have anything in mind about that, just right off the top of your head?
Right off the top of my head, well, I think when it comes, we could set standards for euthanization, get set benchmarks for adoptions, and having everybody on the same database, we would be able to track that and know if they were having adoption events and if they were successfully adopting animals, and having hours of operation that people are consistent and know when they can go to a shelter and adopt an animal.
Okay.
Just
You have 4 or 5 things off the top of your head that you would
right. And
consider in the IGA.
Mr. President, I would also suggest maybe quarterly inspections with reports from each shelter back to us and the board, so we can share that. We have a better understanding. Sharon's exactly right. It's falls in my office too, is our CAT system doesn't do a good job of documenting animals and cats. I don't think it does cats. And, but we need to do a better job. And we're fixing that in-house right now with us. But we don't have inspections besides what we hear back from our ACOs. I think we could do a better job with that. We shouldn't have a crisis to make it break. We should be working.
Exactly.
Yes. And that's something I would encourage.
So, and Sharon, I can help you with all of that. And it should include basic care, right? Sanitation, housing, feeding, basic medical care, or attention, some sort of attention. So, but with respect to Douglas, remember what I said, there's been 3 ACOs, period, end of story. There's never been animal care. There's never been a person trying to get animals out. There haven't been bodies there. And I do think this shelter coordinator position is going to be approved. And I think there will be kennel staff added. Once those things happen, everything changes.
All right, Sharon, do you have direction, at least where you think that, that we want you to go?
What was schools?
I want to take a scribble. Yes, I think I do. If I'm hearing the board correctly, it's to pursue how to fund these other locations, with how to provide more funding and attach that funding to metrics within the IGA. And then would you like me to do an RFP for Hilton?
I think it kind of depends on the USDA grant.
Okay.
If that can be moved to, if you can get wind, that would be moved to a rural setting in Wichita City. Would that count as rural?
Okay.
So, I don't know. I do agree that it would be good to support the local shelters more. And if those shelters could work with some of their nonprofits, even in their communities that they're friendly with, if we would have to support them more, but maybe they can create a network that's more than just in their house. Because our ACOs are using everybody that they can find that's legitimate. So we can't have a agreement with every single little bitty shelter or big shelter, you know, nonprofits included. We can't have an agreement with everyone, but maybe they could create their own networks. And that might be part of the policy, that they have a backup, or part of the IGA, that they have some backup and they have some communication, and, you know, because I think they're just, maybe in the case of Douglas, they just give up. They're like, oh my gosh, it's just 3 of us now. What do we do? We're full, and they're bringing more in and more surrenders. I remember, I just thought of surrenders as part of that conversation. And Dr. Pisano, you had a policy about self-surrenders as well. And so that might be something that makes a difference. In
100%. And what we recommend is for any shelter, you don't take an owner surrender in unless it's an emergency and they already posted on that platform, home to home. Some shelters make it mandatory for 2 weeks before they would take a pet in. There's another online platform, Adopt a Pet Rehome. So shelters now are saying, oh, you got to do this first. And then if they're, you know, you've exhausted all the options, then we'll consider an appointment.
I don't want to muddy the waters, but when we were looking at Huachuca at a facility over there before, didn't you ask USDA if we could change it to there, and they said no?
Thank you. I'm trying to remember the chain of events. It was there've been so many different conversations. At the time, it was, if I'm recalling correctly, I believe when we were looking at a place in Huachuca City, at the time, we were still looking at a partnership with Humane Society of Southern Arizona, and they weren't interested in managing a different location.
But we had to also buy it.
Right. So there's different factors were at play at that time. So I don't think I did go to USDA because our partner wasn't interested in it. But now there's no partner. Yeah, the whole situation has shifted. So.
Okay. Anything burning that we haven't asked, Mr. Administrator, that we need to give better direction to Sharon about?
No, I think it's clear about supporting shelters that we have agreements with, and then also still working with the USDA to see what flexibility they are to do other things with that money. So once we have clear direction from that, then I think we can explore other things like the RFP to see if someone is willing to run a shelter, if the USDA is more flexible, or if the USDA is more flexible with giving more money to the shelters we have. So
I don't think we can wait for USDA to make that decision because, as Sharon said, it's gone up the line. You know,
election.
No telling how
No,
long it will take.
I think it's clear direction that we move in that, supporting ours. That's just the USDA thing,
Right.
Not to abandon that, keep exploring
Yeah.
to see what else we can do with that.
But don't wait till they've made a decision.
Don't wait.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Move on, supporting our animal shelters, but
Try to get some indication from them
correct.
what the future might hold.
So that was clear to me from this meeting.
Okay, it's been kind of
Long, but
back and forth here, but as long as you think that you have some direction and if you need more, then we put another work session together. How's that sound?
Thank you.
very good.
Okay?
And you can, Ms. Pisano, Dr. Pisano.
Yep.
You have her for a year. And I'm excited
Yes,
about that.
we're here.
Thank you, Dr. Pisano.
Yes, feel free. Any of you can reach out to me at any time. Sharon knows and has my contact information, but we can do these meetings whenever you like.
Well, having said that, thank you very much. Before I adjourn this meeting, I need to say that our next meeting will be Tuesday, September the 10th at 10 a.m. in the Board of Supervisors hearing room, and it will be a regular Board of Supervisors meeting. Having said that, work session is adjourned.